समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
What is deep state or shallow state or non-state? That's what we are talking about in this week's National Interest. It's actually early days in 2025 yet, but the deep state looks like the front runner already for winning the Word of the Year honors. Anything goes wrong anywhere, anything that happens that we don't like, and we blame this sinister entity, the deep state. Except it isn't so mythical. It's sinister but not mythical. It is as much a part of our lives and system of governance as shallow state and non-state. We shall explore these definitions and how these intermesh as we go along. However, deep state, often just called DS, has now become the engine of conspiracy theories across democracies. The US started it first. We are now getting there, and Europeans have also jumped to the bandwagon. That's how the European right is rising. The first thing we need to look at is the dictionary or Wikipedia definition of deep state. And that definition is potentially secret and unauthorized network of power operating independently of a state's political leadership in pursuit of their own agenda and goals. Of course, it all has a negative and conspiratorial connotation. Then let's follow our usual three example formula, three example rule, and list three specific issues and events. One, the regime change in Bangladesh. It was sudden, violent at street level, leaderless, and dramatic. It's been widely blamed on the US deep state. We will use DS here on to space to save on space. It's also been called a US DS success, a US deep state success, with the insinuation that similar operations were planned in India as well, regime change operations. Because, of course, the Biden administration and the DS at that point did not like Narendra Modi. Next point, the series of exposes on the Adani Group across 2 years. Many came from a shadowy short seller Hindenburg, which vaporized as mysteriously as it had appeared on the scene. There were also many other stories that came in through organizations supported or funded by OCCRP, that is Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. There is also the ICIJ, or International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Both are supported by George Soros funded Open Society Foundations. Soros is an acknowledged left-leaning anarchist. I won't call him liberal, as in left liberal, left-leaning anarchist. He's also a stock market and currency markets predator. He's the man who broke the pound and the Bank of England in 1992, as well as the many key East Asian countries in 1997 during the East Asian financial crisis. Both these organizations supported investigations leading to stories on Adani. The conspiracy theory is that this was an indirect attack on the Modi government. In fact, PM Modi himself noted at the outset of the current budget session of Parliament that this was the first in many years that a session was beginning without any mischief from abroad. And the third point, two difficult and embarrassing situations India was caught into in Canada and the US, respectively, linked to Sikh radical operations there. In each of these cases, the American media highlighted the stories in great detail and persisted with the coverage, as did Financial Times in the case of Adani. All of this, the argument is, or the conspiracy theory is, couldn't be a coincidence. It must have been the work of the DS. And you know what? Now even Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and their lieutenants are all complaining about it as they set out to drain the swamp in Washington. So far, so good. And we then examine each of these 3 points in some detail. On Bangladesh, are we sure this was merely the handiwork of some potentially secret and unauthorized group? That's a definition of deep state that I pick up from Wikipedia. And that this group worked under the US government radar. If you saw the pictures of George Soros' son flying in to meet Chief Advisor Mohammed Yunus in Dhaka last month, your suspicions will be strengthened. Then also see that iconic, if I may be allowed to use that word just once, because usually I ban it in my newsroom, except when it's being used for a sculpture, a genuine icon. You see that picture, iconic picture of a doting Biden with his arm round Yunus's shoulders? If Hasina's downfall was really engineered by the Americans, was it by some DS working on its own or in conjunction with Biden administration? This won't pass the conspiracy theories definition of DS if they were working with the Biden administration. There are shadowy, amorphous, vaguely defined organizations that work as instruments of a regular upfront state. A trick question follows: how will you describe Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed? As non-state actors, which the Pakistanis would, because they prefer it that way, or deep state? In any case, both will give the Pakistani state plausible deniability. Bhi, hamare haath mein to kuch hai nahi, we are not doing it. The fact is, they are the state. I see them as regiments of Pakistani army in Mufti. They are very much a part of their national state power. They are the state and they mean enormous harm to India. Don't give them the cover of non-state actor or deep state. The Adani issue, however, might be a bit more complex because in most of the stories from Hindenburg and OCCRP, there was no clear US government role. So, was DS indeed at play in this case? But then the US Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, came up with indictments potentially and enormously a lot more threatening than Hindenburg's. Now, were Hindenburg and OCCRP working independent of the state, of the US government, or in cahoots with it? Or vice versa, was the US government working in cahoots with these organizations? Either way, the theory of this being purely a deep state operation will go for a toss. And finally, the issues India faced in Canada and US over Niger and Panu. The notion of this being DS activity was brought in mostly because some in the US and Canadian media were particularly active on this. All of their stories, however, were based on briefings by their own intelligence officials, many on the record. The fact is, there is some such thing as a deep state that we are complaining about, that many are complaining about, but it's almost invariably an element, a part, an instrument of the governing state and works together with it. So if this group of left-leaning organizations were doing whatever stuff they were doing, they were able to be so effective because the Biden administration itself had a lot of personnel who were strongly left-leaning. So just as Trump and Elon Musk now drain the swamp and get rid of this deep state that they inherited, you can be sure that they will build their own deep state. But once again, it will be part of the regular government or the regular state. One way of looking at deep state or DS is the bureaucracy, the civil services, police, armed forces, judiciary, regulators, election commission, and other institutions that span the tenure of multiple governments. They follow the rule book, provide continuity and protect the family silver. Between 1996 and 1999, India had 6 prime ministerships, 6 counting Narasimha Rao and Vajpayee thrice. It was a brilliant set of civil servants, military leaders and nuclear scientists who kept continuity with our strategic program, that's a nuclear program, protected it and did not let a word leak. The same system can act differently. If they kept the nuclear assets so secret for all this while and defined them as peaceful all of these decades, they made them open and military so quickly in 1998. Why? That's because the Vajpayee government asked them to do so. This DS, which provides continuity and also assurance on broad policies and that sovereign commitments will remain intact, also changes on the command of political leaders. Those we describe as the shallow state. The political leaderships, we'll call them the shallow state. Biden, shallow state. Trump, shallow state. Vajpayee, shallow state. UPA government, shallow state. Modi government, shallow state. Now, I know, before you jump, let me explain. Shallow does not denote weakness, but because they are transient. All governments are transient. All elected governments are transient. They will come and go. They will change in the course of time. Other people will come in. Yet, actually, instead of being weak, I'm underlining this so the description shallow is not misunderstood as weak. Actually, they are the ones with real power. Yet, this power can only be used because the political leadership will have the deeper state apparatus at their command. It is only when the shallow state is weak that the deep state takes over the agenda. We saw this play out just after Manmohan Singh signed the nuclear deal. Much of the opposition to it was based on leaks from his office and his MEA from career civil servants, partly motivated by ingrained anti-Americanism and partly from those who found the change too drastic. That's why that nuclear liability law was so poisoned as to make the entire deal infructuous. Not 1 megawatt of power has been produced as a result of that deal. This is precisely what the Modi government's budget just promised to change and which the Modi-Trump joint statement has taken note of. And finally, where does non-state feature? Because remember, we said deep state, shallow state, non-state. So where does non-state feature? From ancient times, sovereigns have used the cover of non-state actors to take their cause forward. From Buddhist bhikshus of the Ashokan 3rd century BC and medieval Sufis to Oxfam, Omidyar, Soros now, non-state actors only have any real power when they work in conjunction with the real state. What is USAID, for example? It can't be DS because it is very much an instrument of the American state. So much so that Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State, has just taken direct control of USAID and moved it into the State Department. The Trumpian objection is that USAID had been hijacked by leftist ideologues who were using it to indulge their own fancy and not to further American interests. Jump millennia to the present day India and ask, what is the RSS? The BJP will say it is a non-state entity and in fact the world's largest NGO. The BJP says it's an NGO, the RSS calls itself an NGO, the world's largest NGO. Ask the Congress and they will call the RSS the BJP's deep state. The exact equation will also apply if you ask the BJP and the Congress what Sonia Gandhi's NAC or National Advisory Committee was under the UPA. The BJP will say it was the deep state. The Congress would say no, it was a non-state entity like an NGO. One shallow state antagonist's deep state, therefore, is the other's non-state entity.